When I was in the 8th grade, that's when I first realized that I wanted to be a lawyer. I actually realized I wanted to be a judge. And it was during a social studies project where we had to reenact something in a courtroom setting. And as the teacher was assigning the parts, and I was raising my hand for each part, he selected someone else. And finally, he got to the position of a judge. And he said, "Who would like to be the judge?" And I raised my hand anxiously and excitedly. And he looked at me and said, "You can't be a judge." And, it's like the world stood still and all I heard was nothing for a minute. And as an 8th grader, I'm thinking, well, why can't I be a judge? Was it because I was black? Was it because I was a girl? I mean, what was it about that moment? And that just stayed with me and it resonated with me. And I decided, well, I'm going to be a judge.
Good for you.
And from that
Fantastic.
point, I knew I had to be a lawyer and do all those things. And that's what started me on my way. So I can't say that someone necessarily discouraged me early on, but that was certainly the spark
That's a beautiful
that set me on
story.
my way. And I tell that story to kids all the time to say, don't let anyone tell you what you can't be.
Right. That's right.
So,
I'll say this. I've been really blessed and fortunate because I had a lot of encouraging teachers and family members. They saw something in me. When I was young, I did get mugged. A person put a knife to me, and I had to go to court. And I said, the day in question, the person brandished a knife, and they said, "Man, you should be a lawyer or something." So that parked the seed with me. But every life has challenges. So I had a situation. I went to a specialized school, Brooklyn Technical High School. You had to take a bus and 3 trains, 3 African-American youth. We went together. And our first day, first days always have an impression. The first day we sat together in a science class. And the teacher looked at us, only 3 black kids in the class, and he was very offended that we should sit together. He thought we were discriminating against everybody. He took offense to that. So he separated each and every one of us to sit in a different location. So I saw then that people viewed race a little differently.
I didn't have a story as it related to someone trying to dissuade me in terms of going to law school. Back when I went to law school in the late 70s, there were a number of programs encouraging minorities to go to graduate schools, and including law school. So it was more inclusive, in my opinion, when I was applying to law school. And so it was an encouragement back then with all different affirmative action programs and the ability to try to make society look at all different levels like society in terms of the pockets. But of course, there's always individuals who will say, you're not cut out, or there's not enough jobs, or comments that would, you sure you want to waste your money, like waste your money, not spend your money. But for the most part, I would say it was pretty encouraging. But there's always those folks who have the biases, and of course we ignored it, otherwise we wouldn't be here.
Therefore, we had the BALSA, Black Students Law School Association. We gathered together, we mentored each other, and say, something like this may happen. In fact, we had some strong mentors, even telling us how to write in a certain way so you won't be detected being African American. A lot of times, African Americans may represent only the tenant or the defendant, usually the underdog. So be objective, fair. So that helped me get through. And so therefore, there's a realization that even some professors may not want to treat everybody equally. So I was prepared, and I also became a mentor as well.
when I began my career, I specialized in zoning and planning, zoning law. So that's what I wanted to do, but it's a very narrow niche of a practice. And my practice took me to, my first job took me to Atlantic City, and again, very small number of people who did that type of practice. I worked for a law firm, and there were a couple of solo practitioners, and in that particular type of work, oftentimes you're presenting to zoning and planning boards in the evening for nighttime meetings or daytime meetings, and you're going to communities, other communities. Well, as a young new attorney, female, black, I was the only female and black attorney, in most times in the circuit, if you will, at the various boards. And the law firm I worked for, they were very nurturing. They taught me and sort of put me out there, and I did okay. However, there was one time I went to a community, and I recall very explicitly that when I walked into the room, every head turned, every head looked at me as if to say, what truck did you fall off of in this neighborhood? How did you find your way here? Why are you here? And then when it came time for my client's application to be heard, and I stood up and I announced myself as the attorney, and then my team of architects, planners, and engineers came behind me, I think every mouth hung open. And I don't even think I had a question posed to me as I presented the application. I think there was just stunned silence and approval, and we left. So that was sort of interesting. But in the midst of my early practice doing that type of work, I was mentored by, actually it was a retired judge, Dennis Brathwaite, who was in Atlantic City, and he had done that practice, and he took me under his wing, and to this day I count him a mentor. And he showed me the way of the world in practice, in the community, and just how to comport myself, being sort of the only African American in the room, the only female in the room, and just being the best attorney I can be in any circumstance.
Your point about mentoring, when I started law school, there were 3 sections. A, B, and C, that's what they would call it, Section A, B, and A, B, and C of the entering class. In that entering class, we had 1 African-American male in each section. No mentors. So when you talk about obstacles, no mentors, no one to interact with by virtue of your community or something you're comfortable with. Trying to form study groups and not be a token or an exception or a project, just to be accepted for your intellect. Those things became barriers because you're sitting there with no other African American males, at least in my case. So who do you talk to about the issues that are going on when you don't understand something that's happening in class? Of course, the professors and other students, after a while, they talk to you and you warm up and you learn that folks are human. But I mean, initially, it's such a shock because you're the only one sitting there. And it's just not normal. It wasn't to me. So that was my first introduction of an obstacle or barrier being in school with trying to find classmates that I could study with who look like me. Yes.
You brought to mind my first time before a civil judge. There's about 80 people in the room, and there was a calendar call, and my client with me. When my client's name was mentioned, I stood up, I indicated I represent this particular individual. So this judge proceeded to ask me, where do I practice? Who do I practice with? And there's a big courtroom, and therefore, it's somewhat embarrassing. And then, therefore, I had to regain the trust of my client, because he feels this judge doesn't know you, he hasn't been practicing, but I did win the trust and I was able to be successful with him. But those things make the impact, and you have to treat people fairly. And those questions were not asked to any other attorney who stood up to represent it, but me, and I was only the African American attorney at that time. I have a very interesting question there. I used to handle some very high-profile cases. I had represented a family in a civil case. We're seeking like $35 million. Her son was shot and killed by law enforcement. Several months after he was killed, they indicted him for certain charges. And so they retained me to represent him, a dead person, on these charges. I tried to get it dismissed. I had to go before a judge in the lower court. He would not dismiss these cases knowing this person is dead. I said, you have no jurisdiction over the body. He's dead. So I had to go to the appellate division, and the appellate division was just furious. They threw it out without blinking an eye. The state did not even appear. But it just showed me how someone could abuse the system. There was no need to knowingly indict this person, but they did it. And so therefore, and again, it made the paper, case dismissed against a dead man. But those things could even happen in our system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The example that came to mind probably ties into what the court has done recently with bail reform, where access to justice may have equaled how much money or the amount of money that you were able to pay your attorney or the system. So I've had clients who couldn't really come up with the bail money and stayed in jail probably longer than they should, just trying to get the money. They eventually go from house to house to house and they get it, but they end up sitting in jail a lot longer than they should. And I always remember wanting to put the bail up for them until they got the money, but of course when you do that it doesn't come back to you. But that was one of the things I always recall, the amount of time that they would sit there, and they weren't exorbitant bails. I mean, it could have been $500, and they just had maybe $50 or something, and I'm talking weeks, you know, that they stay in there. So I've always recalled or remember that sometimes access to justice might correlate to the amount of money that your clients have.
The experience that I've seen, particularly sitting in family court, are just numerous situations where persons just cannot articulate effectively, or at least clearly from our perspective, what they're requesting. And we are, at least we've been a little bit more liberal to accept applications that don't really clearly state what they really want until they get the person in court. And you ask them, what is it that you're really seeking? And what I've been able to discern is that from time to time there are some judges who may be a little more conservative. They stick right to the rule book, and if you haven't submitted every form and written your motion exactly correctly, they dismiss the motion as deficient. However, there are some others who are a little more forgiving and allow the person to come in, and you realize that that person really has an issue. They just didn't know how to state it. And so in that regard, I know there are court rules, and certainly we have to adhere to those requirements. But there are also times when we just need to let a person explain perhaps what they're trying to say, so that we can get to the issue at hand.
I'd like to say this. First of all, I really want to thank the judiciary for, in October of 2013, having that survey for a week. I understand they went to every other county. There was 16,497 surveys that were done in about 19 different areas. And therefore, they are taking access and fairness very seriously. I'm seeing the temperament of judges trying to be fairer because they're being scrutinized. We have surveys coming out, your demeanor, how you treat people. And I was glad to see that first 91% felt safe being in the courts, and close to 87% believed they were treated courteous and also with respect. And so those are important things taking place. And so there's a couple things with immigration. When we have our calendar calls, we make sure a person who's not a citizen, they'll have the opportunity to seek legal counsel regarding their immigration status. We're more mindful with drug court people, with substance abuse. We have a drug court, mental health. I just finished graduating my second person in the Ocean County Mental Health Diversion Program. We're being more sensitive to people with disabilities. So I'm glad to see this court system in New Jersey moving forward in those particular areas. And I believe, Ms. Maven, you were on the Access Committee, and we thank you for your participation there.
Well, by virtue of the fact that I was the chair of the Minority Concerns Committee, I became a vice chair of that Access and Fairness Committee. Similarly, the chair of the Women in the Courts Committee became a vice chair, both of us serving under Judge Grant. And the chief really was forward thinking in creating and developing this particular committee. And as it was formed, even prior to the survey, it was quite a process to gather a large number of judges and staff and other court users, sheriff's department and others, probation, to really talk about the issues of how do we improve or enhance the access and fairness issues, whether it's providing more ramps or more signage to get people through the courthouse so that they're on time, or providing different types of notices so that people understand where they need to be and when they need to be there. I think the survey was an excellent tool, but it's only the first step. Right. And so there will be other exercises to make the staff more attentive to these issues so that at every level in the courthouse, people are aware of their role in improving access and fairness. And for that, the committee is still working. And again, the chief and the director, administrative director, are working very hard to continue us on that path. So we have great leadership in that regard.
And I couldn't agree with both of you more. And I see that the administrative office of the courts has worked also to simplify forms so that pro se litigants aren't inundated with the, as you said earlier, Susan, the I's and the T's, or the technicalities of getting through the system. And I know they had a drive about a year ago or so with expungements, where you didn't necessarily need a lawyer, so the access to justice wasn't whether you could pay a lawyer, but all you had to do was fill out the form. And for those who couldn't fill out the form, they had the ombudsman overseeing the process so that they could get through it, get it to a judge, and get these records expunged or erased so that they could get jobs and move along in society. So I agree with both of you wholeheartedly that those surveys made a difference.